Hello and welcome everybody. Welcome back to Comedian MTG. My name is Ian. On today's episode, we are breaking down the largest West Coast tournament of cEDH of all time. That is right, today we are talking about the Fishbowl 6, a 295 player event held in lovely San Diego. And we're going to be talking about the top 16 deck lists from, once again, the largest cEDH tournament ever on the West Coast. And if you want to support the channel for free and you enjoy videos like this, make sure to that like button and that subscribe button. And especially if you want to take that next step, check out patreon.com/comedianmtg. I'm going to be putting a stretch goal on there pretty soon because I think for a long time I've wanted to start doing more videos on this channel. And the biggest step has been getting the funding to get a second editor for the channel so that we can start doing multiple videos a week. So if you're interested in that support level, I'm going to put a goal basically on Patreon. So if we hit that goal, we can start doing multiple videos a week. So let us know if you're interested in that by going over to patreon.com/comedianmtg and supporting the channel there. Without any further ado, let's break down the top 16 deck lists from this week's tournament, plus an honorable mention I wanted to shout out as well. So I always like to shout out when I see something particularly spicy up in these top placements, and only 1 point short of being able to make top cut was Jesse Feliciano's Bruce Tarl and Kamal list that I figured I just had to give a little shout out to today. This is probably your DM with Brutal Force Stax with Bruce Tarl and Kamal as the head commanders of this deck. Now, as many people know, I've talked about here on the channel that Stax decks are not exactly thriving in the modern metagame, and so to see a Stax-based deck be able to make very deep run into day 2 and almost top cut this tournament with 3 wins and a draw, it's a pretty impressive record. So I had to shout out this list, and I think there was a couple words that Jesse wanted me to read out too. So a couple cool things here that we were talking about. So Ansrag and Tifa, which we'll talk about in a second here, are shouted out as some really incredible finishers. And notably, the way to sort of address this archetype is to sort of treat these commanders as the finisher engines, right? So especially Kamal basically being an overrun for all of your creatures during the combat on your turn makes it pretty easy to be able to overwhelm your opponents with value. We actually did end up playing in the Swiss of this tournament, and seeing the deck perform was actually really cool. Jesse played our round perfectly and was actually the reason that it ended up being a draw, because their basically use of interaction was really well timed, and it stopped me being able to push a win on top of another win. They were able to keep up a Ranger Captain and stop both of us winning at the same time. So some pretty sweet stuff out of this list. So as we take a look through the deck, it really is just Naya beatdown stacks. And the idea of this type of deck is that yes, things like Bowmasters can be super disruptive against these creature-based strategies, but there's enough stacks pieces here and enough big combat finishers to be able to really take your opponents out. You have things like Tifa here, which is one of the new Final Fantasy commanders, and as I mentioned, it was shouted out as one of the big finishers for the deck. But whenever one or more creatures you control with power 7 or greater deals combat damage to a player, untap all creatures you control. If this is the first combat phase of your turn, there's an additional combat phase after this phase. So hypothetically speaking, this will be able to trigger and give you an extra combat, and with your commander being able to leverage some pretty insane value, it makes sense that you're able to get some pretty insane combats here. There's also Ansrag the Quagmole, which whenever it becomes blocked, you untap each creature you control. After additional phase, there's an additional combat phase, right? So effectively, this 8/4 body says either take 8 damage or block me and there's another combat coming. So very powerful there. And then also you can pay into the ability to force someone to block. So obviously, basically paying 7 mana to generate an extra combat in the middle of the combat step. So pretty crazy stuff there. And the disruptive pieces in this deck are pretty aggressive as well, right? Things like Containment Priest, shutting off all sorts of creatures entering from means that are not straight up casting. You have Doorkeeper's Roll, which actually came up in our game, stopping a Thassa's Oracle win. You have protection pieces like the Giver and Mother of Runes. You have Collector Roof saying no to artifacts. You have Archon of Emeria. You have Aven Mind Sensor. Just all of the classic Naya stacks, but with some pretty high mana value payoffs. Really basically saying your opponents are not going to be activating the abilities of creatures or artifacts while this deck is on the battlefield. So really cool to see this Naya beatdown deck make top cut. Speaking of decks we don't traditionally see in Top Cut, we have Liu Wo here with Teferi Temporal Archmage. Now this is a blast from the past. We actually also played during the Swiss of this tournament, and they had an absolutely insane opening hand, and the only way we were able to stop them was actually navigating a situation in which there were two Orcish Bowmasters. Both pilots agreed to let each other's Orcish Bowmasters live so that a wheel could be put on the stack to deal 40 damage to this player, which was obviously a very insane situation, and definitely one of the craziest social games I've ever played in this format. There was a whole deal where the orc armies weren't allowed to swing at me either because I could have countered the wheel, and it was a whole other thing. But yeah, it was a crazy game. Fairy deck able to just vomit a ton of value. For those who haven't seen this deck, because it hasn't really been very relevant for quite some time, the way it works is you get your commander Teferi Temporal Archmage, and you get the Chain Veil, which the Chain Veil is an artifact that allows you to stack activations of planeswalkers. The thing about the Chain Veil that's very interesting, for example, if you were to have your Teferi die during the course of your turn, the Chain Veil's activations are static, and therefore basically you'll end up going through this loop where you're using Teferi's -1 ability, which allows you to untap up to 4 target permanents. And that way, if those permanents are tapping for large amounts of mana, for example, things like, oh, I don't know, Grim Monolith, or Basalt Monolith, or Mana Vault, or the Eternity Elevator, or Thran Dynamo, or Chromatic Orrery. Y'all get the point. If they tap for lots of mana, then all of a sudden you're able to untap those things, put another Chain Veil activation on the stack. Then by the time your Teferi is down ticking, you're then able to get that Teferi back onto the battlefield, and the amount of accumulated Chain Veil activations will allow you to net more than it costs to replay the Teferi with that extra bit of mana attached to it. So, long story short, it goes infinite, Teferi into Chain Veil specifically, and then you're able to activate Teferi infinitely after you play it that last time, or you're able to essentially like go through and activate multiple things throughout the course of the deck. So very sweet stuff there. And then obviously, you know, if you have infinite activations playing the Teferi again, you can just uptick and do the look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one into your hand at the bottom of your library, and to the point where you have infinite mana, you put it into a walk-in ballista, etc., etc. We all get how that works. But yeah, essentially big mana, lots of blue spells here, a bunch of extra turn effects too, right? A part of the deck is that you're just vomiting a bunch of value and then just cranking it in things like extra turns, all that kind of stuff. Obviously you have your standard card advantage engines of like Rhystic, Mystic, etc., etc. I believe this deck has to be on the One Ring unless I'm crazy. Yeah, especially with Teferi's ability to untap permanents, seems kind of insane in here. So very cool and interesting stuff out of this mono blue Teferi deck, and as I mentioned, very sweet to see a list that considered slightly outdated when I started playing the format, and occasionally just shows up and does some pretty nuts stuff. So congrats Red Pilot for the top cut. We have Rambunctiously Rowdy Ral's Romantic Rendezvous here with Pigeon Eyes, who's here with a top 16 performance with this Ral Monsoon Mage deck. Ral is a super interesting deck, and this is actually one of the lists I used. I played it at a small local event last weekend, and I did end up using very similar deck to what Pigeon Eyes had done here with only a few small changes. Sadly, variants got me, but it's definitely super sweet to see Ral up here continuing to be a top cut placer in the format. And what is Ral, for those who aren't familiar with it? Izzet Storm. As cleanly as I can explain it, is coin flipping, storming, etc., etc. If you know Gifts Ungiven Storm in Modern, it is very similar. Although now, notably nowadays, you're not really seeing Gifts Ungiven and Intuition in all of these Ral decks anymore. A lot of them have sort of given up the idea of that package, and they're on a bunch more wheels and things like that. I was actually talking with Pigeon Eyes and Blakey, who's also a high-performing Ral player, about their choice to remove Intuition and Gifts Ungiven from the deck, and they're effectively saying that like there are other cleaner ways to assemble piles in the deck, and you actually don't really necessarily need it, including things like Quiet Speculation, which many Ral players see as a triple Entomb, a very solid target for all of your flashback spells, which is pretty cool to see. Yeah, Ral's classic Izzet Storm though. You're trying to accumulate a high enough storm count that you can flip your commander over and then get its -8 ability, where you can exile the top 8 cards of your library and cast instants and sorceries from among them for free, which is obviously pretty sick for this deck list. Plus, you're able to do a number of other different things with the deck. You're able to go through classic, Past in Flames will adjust guidelines. There's Breach in the deck, but the main way to win is through the Reiterate combo, where you cast Reiterate over and over again, copying something like a Seething Song or a Jeska's Will, and through that you're able to make infinite red mana and then turn that into, for example, infinite Lava Darts or infinite Gut Shots or infinite Lightning Bolts to take your opponents out. And if they have One Ring protection, you're going to see infinite Witch's Marks instead, because that gives the Wicked roll, which allows cause your opponents to lose life instead of taking damage, which will go through 1 ring protection. So cool to see another Ral list up here in Top Cut. Congrats, Pigeon, for your Top Cut. We have Crash Mitch 26 with Greedy Dirtbag, another Ral list here. So we have this Ral Monsoon Mage, and as you know, whenever we have multiple copies of a similar deck, we are going to do a little comparison function. So there are 18 cards different from these 2 lists, where in the Greedy Dirtbag list, we have Faithless Looting, we have those classic Intuition Gifts Ungiven line that I made allusion to, featuring the last deck list, a few bigger top-end pieces like Return the Favor, Inspired Tinkering, Recoup, Bonus Round, etc. Definitely some of the pieces that allow you to really just go over the top with some of these Ral payoffs. Things like Born as well, which is not featured in the Pigeon list, notably. And it does make sense given the fact that you can't ultimate Ral on other people's turns, but sometimes you still need to storm over your storming. Fun fact, we actually did play this player in the top 16 of this tournament, which is pretty interesting. Whereas looking at this other list, we have a number of different other payoffs. We have Finale Promise, Invoke Calamity, both really good at churning through graveyards and things like that to get your spells back. Romantic Rendezvous, a new sort of cantrip from Spider-Man. You have Shreds of Sanity, which I don't know why it's the Russian version of this card, but it's a piece that allows you to recur instants of sorceries from your graveyard. A couple different land slots. The Romantic Rendezvous version is on definitely more lands than the Greedy Dirtbag version of the deck. So definitely really interesting to see some of these differences between these Ral lists. At the end of the day, they're all storming. They're all sort of achieving the similar or the same objective, but you know, there's different permutations that exist of these storm decks, and a lot of them are preferences, how aggressive they want to be in their play styles, etc., etc. So cool to see these 2 Ral lists up here in the Top Cut. I want to share the next couple events I'm going to be at and let you know where all those things are happening. As many know, Frenzy at the Falls is Excalibur's follow-up to Steel City, which was once again the largest cEDH tournament of all time. So obviously Frenzy is going to be huge, and it's an amazing tiered prizing event up in Niagara Falls, November 28th through 30th. We've already got almost 100 people signed up, and I expect this event to continue to grow. The prizing here is no joke, folks, so I definitely think many folks will be there. There is already an amazing selection of cEDH creators who are already signed up for the event, and for those who haven't been to Excalibur events so far, these events are not just one tournament and done type of things. They are really convention style events with a major cEDH tournament as the big payoff for the rest of them. So come check out Frenzy at the Falls, November 28th through 30th in the Niagara Falls area. It'll be super awesome. I'm very excited to head out to their major sequel event here, Frenzy. If you've been following my socials at all on Twitter and Blue Sky and all those things, you've seen me repost these a bunch. Frenzy's going to be crazy. I'm very much expecting it to be an amazing follow-up to Steel City, so it's going to be some sick stuff there. And then we head into December, where I will be going to the wrap-up, which is a 10K hosted by Animal House Cards down in North Charleston, South Carolina. Yeah, just awesome, because like December almost never has major cEDH events, and this is the first packed December I've seen in quite some time. So once again, North Charleston, South Carolina, we got the wrap-up, a 10K hosted by Animal House Cards. This is a really cool tournament group. They care a lot about their community, and they're just really excited to put on a major event. So yeah, it's got some really cool stuff there. The whole format and proxy policy, all that kind of stuff is showing up here on the page, and so yeah, it's still a decent amount of seats remaining. Check it out. Yeah, as I mentioned, like December almost never has major cEDH events, and so it's so cool to see a 10K happening in December, which would be crazy if I was talking about one. But literally the weekend afterwards, there is the Encounter cEDH tournament put on by the Appalachian Gaming League, which you may know as the AGL. They put on a number of events down south this year, and a number of very large events as well. So this is December 13th through 14th. It's another 10K scaling prize pool event, and that'll be down in Hickory, North Carolina this winter. So December 13th to 14th, if you're interested in check out this area. I'm going to be leaving the links to literally all of these events in the description down below, because I want folks to know what's good. These events are coming up. And once again, we never get things like this in December. So it's like so cool to see that the holiday season is not going to be quiet for cEDH. Yeah, the Encounter put on by AGL, as I mentioned, a number of different tournaments successfully run this year, a number that I've attended and had a really good time during. So I'm excited to see all of that stuff. And also, as you can see down here, prize pool jumps if enough people show up. So definitely might be something worth checking out, because there's some pretty sweet cash on the line. And finally, one that's a little bit closer to home, gotta shout out the NJ 3K cash prize event, the NJ cEDH Solstice event put on by cEDH New Jersey, NJCEDH. I love the NJCEDH crew. They literally are just a community-run crew that just puts their heart and soul into everything they run. The New Jersey scene's absolutely awesome. I love every event I've gone to from them. They really just care about their community a lot. Yeah, super happy to shout them out. December 21st, that's Sunday at 9 a.m. Eastern, they are going to be throwing this 3K, the Solstice. All the details for that are going to be in the description, once again, this video, where you can go check that out. But community is super awesome, great vibes, and the TOs really care about their community. So it's super cool to see that stuff, on top of the fact that, yeah, hey, let's go win some really cool prizes. And now we have Notorious MTG here with Not a Threat, Just a Combo with Arcum Dagsson, which is really cool. Arcum has been a archetype that has just sort of existed on the fringes of the format since the banning of Paradox Engine way back in the day, from when I first started cEDH. So really cool to see Arcum up here, and spoilers, this is not the only Arcum list in this top 16, which is kind of wild to say, because this is a deck that really hasn't done a whole lot meta-wise, and yet here we have two separate copies of this deck list in the top 16 of this tournament. So very cool stuff here from Notorious. We have Arcum Dagsson here with the idea of this deck. To be honest, I guarantee I won't be able to tell you what most of this deck does, in the sense that I know there are lines on lines on lines on lines that are available that these Arcum players know very well, but I'll do my best to share most of the stuff that I am aware of. For example, things like Mind Over Matter becomes a win condition when you look at the One Ring. As you discard a card, you're then able to untap your One Ring and draw more than one card, and therefore you're able to repeat that the loop going through your deck. And you might be saying to yourself, okay, well, Mind Over Matter is a 6 mana enchantment. Well, that's not technically true, because with Encroaching Mycosynth, one of the best pickups for this deck of all time, non-land permanents you control are artifacts in addition to other types. The same is true for permanent spells you control and non-land permanent cards you own that aren't on the battlefield. So if you happen to get your Encroaching Mycosynth out, which once again your commander is a tutor in the command zone, find yourself very easy to grab something like a Mind Over Matter, because guess what? It is an artifact now, right? So there's some really interesting synergy there. For those who haven't read Arcum before, you have target artifact creature. Let's get the errata text here. It says target artifact creature's controller sacrifices it. That player may search their library for a non-creature artifact card, put it to the battlefield, then shuffle. So you are seeing a lot of these tiny artifact creatures that Arcum will play, and then they'll try and accelerate out their commander, usually with haste. You know, sometimes there will be something like Marvin out to get the commander down. Sometimes there will be things like, I believe they play Lightning Greaves in the deck, unless I'm sorely mistaken. I know there's at least Lava Spur Boots, because we saw that in actually around a Swiss that I got to play with Notorious in this tournament, which is pretty sick. Also notably, there's another combo that I haven't mentioned yet, which is Chromatic Orrery and the Filigree Sages. So for 2 and a blue, you get to untap target artifact. Now Chromatic Orrery color fixes as part of its text, and therefore when you tap it for 5 colorless mana, it's actually able to use the Filigree Sages ability, make infinite mana there, and then at a certain point you're able to draw a card for each color you control, and therefore at that point you can start drawing your cards through your deck one by one. It also does like a bit of the Magda thing, where they have like big payoffs like God Pharaoh Statue, where you're able to just kind of lock your opponents out of the game from taking relevant game actions, which is pretty sick. I know when I was talking to Notorious about the deck list, they had mentioned that there's some new really cool loops you can do in the deck with Peter Parker's camera, although we didn't get too intimately into details about how exactly those combos go off, but I'm aware that there are some really cool things that you can start to do with the camera now in the deck, which makes sense because Arcum's ability kind of has a big upfront cost to it, but being able to copy it for only 2 mana is pretty sick. Plus you can, break parity on some really cool Stax pieces in this deck list, and the best part is it's a Staxy artifact deck that has some pretty aggressive win lines and is still mono blue, so it can play a ton of really just normally good interaction that other folks kind of struggle to be with. Plus, one of the few decks in the format that gets to take advantage of one of the most broken lands in the format, which is Mishra's Workshop. 3 colorless mana to be used for artifact spells. That stuff is messed up, and every time I've seen Arcums do really well in the format, they use the Mishra's Workshop, and it makes it look real dang good. It's really cool stuff for this Arcum list, and I'm definitely excited to see the differences between the 2 Arcum lists featured in this breakdown, but major, insanely major props to our pilots, especially Notorious here, as we look at his deck list, for being able to take such a unique cEDH deck and bring it to the top 16 of the largest West Coast tournament of all time. Speaking of unique cEDH decks, this top 16 does not quit. We have Skyfen here with tar-covered dinosaur. Skyfen, one of the co-hosts of the Critical EDH channel, so I want to shout them out for that. And it's so fun because we were talking about the fact that he was like, hey, screw it, I'm going to play this really cool new deck at the start of this tournament, and then we ended up playing later in the Swiss rounds at a point in which he was already locked for top 16. We didn't play in the top 16 match, but we played in the round before top 16, so it was really, really cool to see this deck. Sadly, in our game, it was actually a really funny situation where when I was talking to Skyfen about it, he mentioned that he was on Demonic Consultation in his deck, and I was like, wow, that's a really aggressive card to be playing. And he said, effectively, well, sometimes you mold the 3, and you just need to deal the Demonic Consultation for a Lion's Eye Diamond so you can play your Gwenom. And ironically, when we played in Swiss, I believe he mulled the 4 and then cast him on a Consultation so he could grab his Lion's Eye Diamond so he could play a turn 2 Gwenom. So, yeah, the comedy was definitely there for that particular instance. So, very, very funny situation there. But, yeah, I mean, congrats to Skyfen for taking Gwenom, which is now seeming like, between this and it's, like, won a couple, like, smaller tournaments now, or at least, like, top cut a few. I think Gwenom's real. Like, it's really cool to see this deck start to pop off, and it's definitely one that I've wanted to play since release. As many people know, Bolas's Citadel is literally one of my favorite cards of all time, so being able to see a deck like this perform makes me overjoyed. It's really, really cool to see. For those who don't know, Gwenom, when she attacks, she turns into a Bolas's Citadel until the end of turn. What's also nice is that as soon as that trigger resolves, you do not care what happens to Gwenom. So you can sacrifice Gwenom, you can have her get exiled, you can whatever happens, doesn't matter, you have that ability until the end of turn. And realistically, every time I've seen a Gwenom attack, I've played against Gwenoms and with Gwenom probably upwards of 20 times at this point since the deck's been released, and I've only seen it ever whiff one time. I was told by Skyfen that they did whiff once during the course of Swiss, but then they were able to win the game the next turn, so notable there, right? For combos, you do have the Professor Onyx and Chain of Smog combo. For those who aren't intimately familiar with that, you make yourself discard over and over again with Chain of Smog, which the Magecraft trigger from Professor Onyx will see and will drain your opponent's 2 life at a time. You got classic options here like Great Merchant of Asphodel to come in, nuke your opponents for a decent amount of life, and then go back up to your higher life. You have the Death Cultist combo here, so if you have Death Cultist, which says you can sacrifice itself and target player loses a life, you gain a life. And then if you have the enchantment of Mortuary, it says whenever creature is put into your graveyard from play, put that creature on top of your library, right? So you have the Death Cultist, you sack itself to your ability, it makes your opponent lose life, but notably it makes you gain 1 life back. So then it will account for the cost that when you put it back on top, as long as you have Gwenom active, you can play it for 1 life off the top of your library. Effectively, because you're losing a life and gaining a life, that goes net even, and you're able to drain your opponent's 1 life at a time throughout the course of the table. So that's one of the several combos in the deck. We have the Chain of Smog combo, as we mentioned. Obviously, Sensei's Divining top, Aetherflux Reservoir. It's a Citadel deck. It makes sense. Not literally a Citadel deck, it's Gwenom deck, but you know what I mean. And then, as you can see, a lot of cheap artifacts, so that when you get that Gwenom trigger, you should be able to just rip through the top of your deck and make a lot of crazy stuff happen. Notably, 24 land deck, very low to the ground, 21 lands if you don't include the MDFCs, which is pretty crazy. Multiple swamps and being on Tainted Pact. I was talking about this with Skyfen as well, and they said, you know, sometimes you just need to be able to clear through the top of your deck, and you actually really don't care if you double hit on Tainted Pact. Essentially was sort of his motto with it, which is pretty interesting to see that the, you know, obviously playing somewhat of a dangerous combo, but still kind of down to go for it there. Tendrils of Agony, another great way to do the whole thing we were talking about. Doomsday, hilarious. The fact that Doomsday is a combo in a mono black deck in the year 2025. There was a whole Doomsday pile that we had talked about, but effectively like the Mortuary pile and piles like that are the easiest way to do it. Plus Black Sun Zenith, which you might see in a couple Gwenom lists nowadays. Notably, you can play Black Sun Zenith for 0, X equals 0 off the top of your library, right? So for example, if you have something like Aetherflux Reservoir going, right, you're able to play Black Sun Zenith for 0, right, paying 2 life, and then it shuffles itself back into your deck, right? So if you make a Doomsday pile of, you know, a bunch of random stuff that you can cast off the top, then into Aetherflux, into Black Sun Zenith, you're able to cast Black Suns, Aetherflux will go up, cast it over and over again, and you're able to net infinite life and infinite damage that way through the reservoir. Super sweet deck list. Super happy that I was able to cover it, because what a treat to be given such a unique and cool deck here at the top 16 of this tournament. Congrats, Skyfen, for playing the sickness up to the top cut of largest cEDH tournament of all time in the West Coast. We have Snackaka here with Pirate Bay, Alien, Shish Kebab, Cordyceps, Money Farm. Yeah, I don't even know. This is the Zach Adler, also known as Snack Adler, here with his Blue Farm list. Zach won the Top Deck Envy last year, and here's top 16 in this tournament. We actually also played in our top 16 match, and was a super crazy game with the two of us and Juan, who we'll talk about later, and our pilot that we mentioned earlier, although our Ral pilot died about halfway through our match, and sadly we had an amazing back and forth match, and we hit the time limit of the match, unfortunately, because nowadays after the 11-hour incident, most cEDH tournaments do have a time limit on top cut nowadays, and so we played a great game. It was really, really intense. It could have kind of gone either way. I had to push in a bad window because I knew we only had about 20 minutes left in the match left. I got stopped, and then Zach got to his turn, but wasn't able to actually push a complete win because we ran out of time, right? Which is part of the calculated risk of the bad push on my turn, sadly. But our top seed was able to advance to the top 4. But just wanted to shout out Zach, and I had a crazy, crazy semifinals game, and definitely was really, really cool getting to play with him for the first time. So here he has his Timna and Crom Blue Farm list. Got some cool stuff here, some stuff that might be a little bit off the beaten path, stuff like Flame Scroll Celebrant with the Revel and Silence backside. Getting an extra silence effect in the format's never really a bad thing. Mayhem Devil here, a little bit more responsible, ready to utilize the treasures that are sort of floating around the format to be control pieces. And boy, did that Mayhem Devil mess me up for the majority of our semifinals match. Honestly, I was basically neutered for the majority of the game, because between this and Timna Dargo, there were 2 Mayhem Devils for the majority of that match, and I sort of sat there being like, all right, I can take almost no relevant game action. So definitely a card that I can see the impact of having played against it. Cool stuff here, seeing Beseech the Mirror. Definitely some of the more proactive Blue Farm lists are on that type of tech. Snapback, notice that it's a card that like was gone from Blue Farm for a really long time, and now sort of back in the culture of Blue Farm players nowadays. Nice, decent 12 artifact on the grinding station lines on Necro. So definitely doing some of the more proactive stuff, but balancing it with, you know, as I mentioned, pieces like Mayhem Devil and stuff like that to be a little bit more controlling against some of the creature decks in the format. So cool stuff here for this Blue Farm list, and congrats to Snack on their top 16. Gotta do a major shout out to Heavy Play, one of the sponsors and partners of this channel for quite some time, because they're awesome, and I continually am able to say that because Heavy Play products do not let me down. They have an amazing selection of deck boxes, dice trays, playmats, etc. I consistently use my Heavy Play product, even though they've never asked me to go and use it live at events and things like that, but it's because I genuinely believe in this product a ton. They are amazing at keeping your deck boxes, keeping your cards safe. They dice tray setup. I even have so there's the Heavy Play XLs, which is what you should often keep like double sleeve decks in, and then I have a few extra like Pokemon cards that I use to like stuff it so it's 100% snug with the box. I have my dice tray in there where I keep all my dice. It's the most convenient dice tray I've ever used. And then I have a smaller Heavy Play box where I keep all my tokens, and that's my setup for every single tournament, and I put on my Heavy Play playmat, and it works every single time. It's so convenient, especially when you don't have a lot of space at some of these more cramped tournaments you can end up at. The system saves me so much time, so much mental stress and anxiety. I love using Heavy Play, and if you use code comedian when you check out at heavyplay.com/comedian, you can get 10% off your order. It's a brand I heavily recommend, and honestly, I have so many interpersonal communications with folks who watch the channel who are like, oh hey, I tested them out, and I ended up dropping a lot of money on their stuff because I tried it once and fell in love with it. And I genuinely, as I said, I wouldn't recommend them as much if I didn't really believe in the product, but Heavy Play is awesome. Thank you so much for partnering with the channel, and once again, use code comedian to get 10% off your order. We have Mammoth here with Blue Farm Turbo. We're going to compare these two Blue Farm lists. Alright, so 7 cards different between these two decks. The Turbo list is on Mistrise Village, Last Chance, Spire of Industry, Slaughter Pact, Steel Enchantment, Jessica's Will, and Talisman of Dominance, where the Pirate Bay list is on a lot of the cards I pointed out, funny enough. The Flame Scroll Celebrant, the Mayhem Devil, the Grinding Station, Wheel of Fortune, Beseech the Mirror, and Orum's Chant. So Snack's list definitely more on silence effects being on Flame Scroll and Orum's, whereas this list a little bit more diverse with some of the red options, right onto Last Chance for an extra turn effect, and Jessica's Will, which, as they mentioned in the name Blue Farm Turbo, definitely tends to be one of the more proactive choices. Although surprised to not see Grinding Station and Wheel, because those tend to be towards the more very aggressive, proactive versions of the Blue Farm list. But congrats to our pilot for your top 16. We have XJVL here with a fish and a dog. Here is a Thrasios Yoshimaru list, and it's doing some pretty interesting stuff here. This definitely seems like it is of the Thrasios Yoshimaru variant that they tend to be a little bit more aggressive, and they're almost what I would call like Turbo Thrasyoshi is probably the best way I can describe these variants. What they give up in interaction, they gain in the ability to just sort of whack their opponents over the head with Cradle untappers, essentially, is how I would describe this archetype. So it's a really interesting sub-permutation of the Turbo Cradle strategies, right? They have things like Orochi Leafcaller as a way to be an early body that also filters your guy's Cradle mana into mana of different colors, which is pretty interesting to see. They're on Deceiver, Exarch, and Pestermite, just a bunch of different ways to untap. Very similar to Zach's list from the top 16 of the Steel City Open that we covered on this channel here as well. On Felidar Guardian as well. So a lot of things that allow you to come in, untap, flicker, all that kind of stuff. Peregrine Drake as a second Cloud of Fairies effect, right? So definitely, as you can see, heavy on the creatures, heavy on the proactivity, right? Charismatic Conqueror there to make a bunch of bodies, not opting to do like the abhorrent Oculus tech that some people mess around with for this archetype. Playing a couple extra tutors, things like Ecological Appreciation, on Eldritch Evolution, on Rally of the Galadrium is another copier, so this makes a copy of a creature and you can conspire it, so it makes 2 copies, which means it's 2 spells. You have to kill on the stack, which is pretty interesting. Reap and Sow is another way to grab Cradle, but also to blow up your opponent's lands if need be. Hidden Strings, Cradle Untapper, etc., etc. Really interesting stuff here, but as I mentioned, the sacrifice for this archetype is low interactivity, right? Which is really interesting, because I one of the things that I talked about with a lot of folks who were in this tournament and who ended up especially making top cut with myself were the differences we all had in gameplay, right? I mentioned that the format's picking up the pace a little bit, but I had some of the most interactive Magic I've legitimately ever had in this tournament. I had people who were literally top deck tutoring Force of Wills to basically say, hey, nobody pushed during the course of our turn, which is why I ended up having 4 draws at the end of Swiss. It was not something I was intending on doing, and in fact, I openly refused draws in situations where I could have lost the game multiple times, right? Like took extreme gambles in situations where we called things draws, right? And so it was definitely very interesting, because I think there was a bit of like win phobia, right? Where people were basically saying like, hey, I'll take a draw instead of taking another chance at a loss. And there was many times in my games where I was going, hey, these games feel like they're going to go long. We need to start letting people push for wins. There was also a deep level of irony that, you know, the weekend, basically 2 days after I drop a video talking about how Orcish Bowmasters is the best draw card in the format and is really unhealthy for the format, how Orcish Bowmasters caused several of my draws during the course of Swiss in which people weren't able to win the game, but Bowmasters was there basically just making it so that no one could take relevant game action in very frustrating matches. So there's a deep irony there for sure. This seems to be my curse, is every time I complain about a system, I'm victim of it immediately the weekend afterwards, which is pretty funny. That all being said, sorry to tangent on your deck list here, JVL, but point being, right, you know, you see these very minimal interactive decks, and I heard a lot of people saying, hey, people were being very proactive, people were jamming very aggressively. Meanwhile, I was like, what games are you guys playing? I've been playing nothing but Interaction City throughout the course of the tournament. So definitely some interesting stuff here, and notably, right, if you go to a 295 person tournament and play every round of Swiss like I did, right, you play 3 opponents every round times 7 rounds. It's 21 opponents, right? So at the end of the day, you play 21 out of 295 players there. So you're seeing a fraction of the field, literally less than 10% of the field every time you sign up for one of these events. And I think that's where some of these differences in player experience really begin to show themselves, right? So fascinating, even so, that a deck like this that is more proactively inclined, but at the same time, not turbo per se, right? Like it is a proactive deck that, wins in a way that is hard to interact with, but is making choices to basically be more vulnerable to a lot of interaction in the format, and yet succeeding because of it. So fascinating stuff here. And I know JVL's been doing pretty well out on the West Coast with this deck list, as you can see. Been kind of on a tear with this list, especially getting a decent amount of top 16s with it. So clearly doing something right, but I do want to caution folks, just in general, I think a lot of the narrative lately about the format has been people who are being more open to cutting interaction from their decks. But just be careful if you go too deep into that. It becomes turn order simulator, right? And the format becomes a rather ships passing in the night type of thing, right? And the consistency that a lot of decks can give you becomes super inconsistent if it's just a matter of like who got first more times over the course of the tournament, right? So yes, cutting some interaction can leave your deck with a level of efficiency that's higher than others, but it is also worth noting when that is extremely not the case, right? And deck lists like this one can also afford to be a little less interactive because of how many silence effects and things like that they're on, right? Between Allosaurus Shepherd not being technically a silence, but you get the point where I'm going there. Voice of Victory, Ranger Captain especially. I mean, Ranger Captain alone can sometimes hold down the fort on a really tough and complicated game, right? Like I was talking about when we were looking at Jesse's list earlier. So definitely some interesting nuance to all of those things going into basically where cEDH is going into the future. So, all I'll say is, folks, don't go too crazy on cutting interaction, because every time you go in seat 4, you're going to really, really regret it. But yeah, interesting stuff here from this deck list, and congrats to our pilot for their top cut. We have Arcum Dagsson number 2 here with the one Phyrexian. Really cool stuff. Let's compare our 2 Arcum Dagsson lists. So when we compare these 2 deck lists, they're about 20 cards different. So our cEDH primer list, which is our more recent rendition of this deck, and compared to Not a Threat, Just a Combo. So Not a Threat, Just a Combo was our one we looked at earlier with the Peter Parker's camera tech that's notably not in this one, which is interesting. Down 4 islands, which, yeah, I guess this list is on. Okay, so I guess there's just one less land that this list is on, our more recent top cutting list. So yeah, effectively very similar there. We have 1,000 Year Elixir to give haste to your Arcum. You have Draw Scorpion, a kind of a classic artifact combo card from the format. When it or another artifact creature is put into a graveyard, you can untap an artifact. Obviously, with Arcum's ability, makes it pretty interesting, especially if Arcum is an artifact, to be able to untap that over and over again. Spine of Ishtar, a classic in any weird artifact combo-y style deck. So cool to see that one here as well. And a couple more of the tap to make mana weird little guys, so like Plague Mirror and Mannequin, because they are both ramp pieces and they allow you to have a body to sack to Arcum later on. You have Unwinding Clock for some really interesting synergies there when you get to a grindier part of the game, and Repurposing Bay, which is Birthing Pod for artifact. Notably also Agatha's Soul Cauldron, very good at stealing some abilities that hit the graveyard. Some cool stuff here, and a few pieces of different interaction. Where our list from earlier, as I mentioned, a few on the little guys, a few more little guys on Mystical Tutor, Peter Parker's Camera, and Grafdigger's Cage, which can mess up Arcum Dagsson sometimes, but not too much. So really cool to see the difference between these 2 lists. And once again, both of our Arcum pilots, congrats on top cutting with some absolute heat in the spice department. Some really cool stuff here. Once again, we want to shout out partner of the channel, Tales of Adventure Magic. ToaMagic.com is one of the best places to grab your Magic singles, period. They have a ridiculously extensive source of singles. They are awesome at doing that. And also you can get code comedian, get you 5% off your order. They have insanely fast shipping. You can even pick up your singles at events. And once again, they have a crazy selection of not only reserve list, but also high-end cards, and kind of just everything you need to make sure that your deck is tournament ready. So check out toaMagic.com and use code comedian to get 5% off your order today. I'm so excited to talk about this one. So we have MaxP MTG. For those who don't know, MaxP is a player who's been around the format for quite some time, and fine is an allusion to the fact that Max was a Timna Thrasios player for quite some time, and a number of his peers, myself included, were giving him a lot of flack for being on Timna Thrasios because he would constantly complain about the consistency of the deck and things like that. And then specifically, I know like right before Steel City was sort of his breaking point, because we were talking about it beforehand, and he was playing a lot of games because we played a lot the night before the tournament, and I was like, dude, I just think that you are like dying on a hill of a deck that you don't need to, when I think if you maybe switched it up a little bit, you'd have more success. And so this is why his deck is called Fine. For he did throw in the towel and play Blue Farm, and honestly, he was killing it. So it didn't look too bad. Let's compare his list to the last one we talked about, which was the Blue Farm Turbo variant. Fine variant is once again on Mayhem Devil, so the similarity between Snack and this list here from Max. Also on Beseech Them here and Wheel of Fortune, so funny enough, their list and Snack's list is much closer on Gitaxian Probe as well, which I love to see in a Adnaz Necro deck. I don't feel like I would ever cut that from one of these style of decks, because I think it's just so good at cracking top deck tutors and occasionally just giving you a free peek at like some of the more complicated board states, all that kind of stuff. On Spell Pierce, a little bit of, I believe this was his joking spice slot for the tournament with Spell Pierce. So, ooh. Compared to the Turbo list, featuring a couple of the cards we mentioned as being more Turbo, notably not on Mnemonic Patrol, which has been a pretty common piece in a lot of Blue Farm lists. So congrats to MaxP on his top cut with Fine. Good to see him do well with this. Oh, hey, it's me. Now we have here my Abomination Kinnan list. For those who haven't seen this Abomination Kinnan, this is my take on modern Kinnan. So the difference between this Kinnan is sort of where the illusion comes from. The idea being that, yeah, we're kind of done with big flips. And I was finding that especially during some tournament games and stuff like that, it was very easy to sort of hate on Kinnan when the deck list was basically able to just flip a ton of value into play over and over again, right? So one of my adaptations was, hey, what if I just played a bunch of good cards and didn't play a bunch of big creatures, and also helped coincidentally with things like, opening hands and stuff like that, and not drawing a bunch of 7-drops and things like that. So there's Abomination Kinnan, and then obviously this gets compared to the NBC Kinnan that Freedom Waffle plays a decent amount. The difference is I tend to also like the flexibility of pushing faster wins than that list does. Not that I think that list is incapable of winning on turn 2 or turn 3, but this list does so with a lot more frequency. That being said, though, I tend to hear very often like, oh, this is a Turbo Kinnan list, and usually people mean like this is a Turbo win the game list, and it does once again have the capability of winning pretty consistently on turn 3. That doesn't mean that that's the explicit goal of this deck, right? And one of the redefinitions I've been sort of pushing lately is that this is a Turbo mid-range variant, right? With the idea that this is accelerating you into a mid-range game plan, if not being able to win early, right? But a huge part of this Abomination Kinnan list is reading windows appropriately, right? Is this my opportunity to attempt to win the game? And if not, the deck's full of adaptations, right? I can't tell you how many times I've put Tezzeret on the stack with this deck, with the explicit understanding that, like, I highly doubt this Tezzeret will resolve and allow me to go get a Basalt Monolith, but very willing to be like, hey, if anyone shows me a counter spell, this is going to go get a 1 ring. I'm assuming this isn't going to resolve getting a Basalt Monolith anyways, right? And many times I accelerate once again into that mid-range plan, and the deck works very well at doing that specifically. So as you'll notice here, not very many creatures in the deck. Most people noted that I was playing 5-mana Teferi, which was me testing a slot in the deck. Unfortunately, I found multiple times where I thought I would be presented really good opportunities to flash this in and then take advantage of it during the course of the game, and almost every single time what would happen would be that I was holding up the 5 mana, and then there would be one factor that was just slightly off, right? For example, my opponent has a Ranger Captain down, and I can't flash this in and expect to beat the Ranger Captain and get through a bunch of interaction, right? I just knew that wasn't going to be able to work like that, right? So unfortunately, this 5-mana Teferi is probably not staying in the deck. It's probably switching out for a High Fate Trickster, which is tough because High Fate Trickster is a card that I've not really loved because of its 2 toughness, especially for 4 mana, but I do think it's objectively correct, given how many times having a High Fate over Teferi would have come up very favorably for me over the course of the tournament. Sadly, I do think that Teferi is not long for this deck list. Not to mention this deck's also getting a few shake-em-ups when Avatar comes out, because at the very least, the card that is 100% going in there is going to be Wan Shi Tong, which I will definitely talk about later for this deck list. But as you can see, not many big flips. One of the other ones being tested was the Reality Chip. It's one I've wanted to test in the deck for a long time, but didn't have the slots for it. Tested it here, and it did fine. It was okay. It is one of those things where, because you're not doing the big flips plan in this deck, you sort of take every card advantage engine that blue is going to give you, which is why we're on Fairy Mastermind and Polywog Project and Reality Chip and Ristic and Mystic and One Ring and Nezahal and Sylvan Library, right? Like you just take every card advantage engine and you play a very explosive blue-green deck, right? There's a reason I say the closest thing we'll have to Docksat in the command zone, because that is the modicum of why Kinnan is there. It's an outlet and it's a mana doubler, right? And everything else needs to be supporting that plan, which means the card draw aspect of the deck is very hungry. I get questions about stock up in this deck all the time. I love it. I will never cut stock up from Kinnan, at least for the time being. I've really enjoyed this card in the deck. It's not winning every single game every time you resolve it, right? Like, it's not the most broken card in the entire world, but it's just good at getting you the next pieces of what you need so you can continue playing the game, while also not presenting so much of a threat that your opponents are forced to answer this right away, right? Like, it is, at the end of the day, kind of an expensive double cantrip, right? But I can't tell you how many times I've resolved to stock up, and it gets me that one thing that I'm missing, plus a counterspell, for example. It is just solid. You may notice only 2 creature tutors in the whole deck, because creature tutoring is not the point of this deck, right? Like, the artifacts are actually where this deck has its highest amount of synergy and things like that, right? We are trying to hit our Basalt Monoliths, our Machine God's Effigies, all that kind of stuff, right? Now, there are times in which we do need to, for example, if we have Machine Gods in hand, we want to go grab a Devoted Druid, right? Or we have infinite Basalt mana and we want to go get Thrasios, right? That's why the creature tutors do stay in the deck, but it's definitely not a priority versus other Kinnans, right? As you can see, extremely interactive. I love the interaction package in this deck. It's been felt really, really good. Yeah, if anything, I probably add to it rather than take away from it, because yeah, interacting in this metagame feels more important than ever. And, you know, for all of the reasons that I sort of explicitly stated earlier in this video when talking about the Thrasios Yoshimaru thing, I like playing a game plan in which you can actually have agency. I don't like giving up on that agency. A lot of people ask me about Apple of Eden. For some reason, I just am allergic to drawing this card during the course of a tournament. I don't know why. I guess I'm still interested in keeping it in the deck. It's still an infinite colorless outlist because it filters your mana. Plus, it's a way to beat an opponent who's potentially got like a whole lot going on. That being said, literally never shows up in this deck. I don't really understand why, but it is what it is. So we'll I guess handle that appropriately when the time comes. But it's not, I guess, the most gospel slot in the deck, I guess, because, you know, that being said, like, I'm never tutoring for it hyper aggressively, but it's kind of hard to argue to do so when you have things like Basalt Monolith that just win the game. But yeah, Apple's staying in for now. Super happy with these card draw engines. I don't think this deck is nearly as good as if you cut Sylvan Library. I know Sylvan Library is a bit of a contentious card in Kinnan nowadays, but I think Sylvan Library is absolutely goated in this deck, and I literally would never cut it from this list. It just, the amount of times that specifically, and I talk about this with Kinnan pilots all the time, 1 mana dork, 2 lands, and being able to go like, cool, land drop mana dork, land drop Kinnan, tap the dork for Sylvan Library, just it constantly an overperformer in this list. So yeah, definitely want to shout that card out. Yeah, but I love this Abomination list. Genuinely, it's feels very, very strong every time I play it, and it definitely plays not like Flip Kinnan, right? It's definitely Simic mid-range with a really broken mana doubler in the command zone, but that's also part of the luxury of this deck, is that, like, you don't have to rely on Kinnan to do everything for you, right? Like, you're actually just genuinely relying on good Simic cards to power you through, right? And you'll see, obviously, like, compared to other versions of these decks, right, no Seaborn Muse, because what are you using all the mana for, right? It wasn't like we have Thrasios in the zone where you can just put a bunch of cards in your hand, but that's what this deck's doing, right? It's not trying to flip all these big creatures into play. It's because, I mean, first of all, there's not even a whole ton of them, right? I tell people all the time when I'm playing this deck, like, if I am flipping, it means something has gone horribly wrong, essentially, for this deck list. So, yeah, I really like this deck, as I said, and been super happy with the performance. Ended up going technically 3-1-4 over the course of the tournament, having lost the semifinals to the timeout, as we mentioned. It was one of those situations where I do genuinely think, had I got an entire turn cycle, I think the inevitability engines on my side of the field were winning me that game, and sadly we just didn't have enough time, because the game was a very nuanced and complicated game, and there were several people trying to push at many times during the course of the game, and I had to keep a pretty bad mulligan to 5. It was effectively like 2 lands and 2 cards to pitch to Commandeer and a Commandeer, right? Yeah, I had to make adaptations according to that for a large portion of the game. So I couldn't push in the early game, and then it was locked out from the Mayhem Devils for a lot of the rest of it until I got the Hullbreaker Horror down and was able to do that sort of bad win attempt that I mentioned earlier. But yeah, I definitely a very disappointing way to end the tournament to lose to the timeout rule. But at the same time, and I can't make this more explicitly clear, and I said this to folks at the tournament itself, right? I was like, literally having just lost to the timer, I was like, I wouldn't have it any other way. I think the timer policy is needed, right? Like, I do think that there should be a timer set on these semifinals and finals rounds, because these games do have the ability to just, like, people can talk in circles for hours, right? It can happen. So yes, I was the victim of a policy, but, like, you can also argue, like, guess what? At the end of the day, probably should have just done better in Swiss, right? Like, that's, not that I'm disappointed with a 19-point record for a day 2 tournament. I'm very happy with ending the tournament in 6th place. I feel very proud of that result, right? But it's just one of those things where it's like, yeah, definitely a tough way to lose out on the tournament, was just not having enough time to articulate a win that would have stuck. So At the end of the day, though, very happy with how the deck went. Very happy with my performance during the course of this tournament. Yeah, just feel good about it at the end of the day. So sweet stuff. I guess this is a good a time as ever to say, hey, if you're interested in cEDH coaching, I do that. So if you're interested in that, you can email me at comedianmtg@gmail.com or any of the places that are in my link tree down below. So, DM me on Twitter and all that kind of stuff. I have rates, and for those who don't know, when the tariffs first got announced this year, I actually did drop my rates. So they are definitely lower than ever, and I'm also looking at doing a sale for the month of November. So if folks book more than one session for the month, you can get $10 off each session that you book, as long as you book multiple for the month of November. So if that's interesting to you, especially because we've got some pretty cool tournaments on the horizon. So if you're interested in getting coaching for those, definitely hit me up at any of those places. I'm going to be talking about some of those tournaments throughout the rest of the video too. We have Pheno Dreams here with KT Razorcake Blue Farm. This is Pheno's Blue Farm list that they have been playing pretty consistently for quite some time. Actually made a pretty crazy comeback to get to this point in the tournament, and yeah, as we do with every copy list, we're gonna take a little look at the most recent one. So we'll compare it to Max's fine list. So as we can see here, these decks are 7 cards different. We have Watery Grave, Into the Floodmaw, Mnemonic Betrayal, Hope, or Another Wheel, Jessica's Will, and Flare in the Razorcake version of the deck, compared to the Beseech, Praetor's Grasp, Mayhem Devil, Orcish Bowmaster. So no Bowmasters in Pheno's more recent version of the deck. No Gataxian Probe, the card I called out, and of course the Spice card, Spell Pierce, omitted from this deck list. Pheno's definitely been on the Jessica's Will, Flare of Duplication camp for this deck since basically I first ever watched their decks for Blue Farm, so it makes a lot of sense that they continued that trend here for this most recent tournament. But congrats on your top 16. First deck here in the top 4, we have Freedom Waffles, Kinnan NBC, and yeah, let's compare it to my list that we saw earlier to see what our differences are. So as you can see, a significant amount. We are 28 cards different here with these lists. As I mentioned, light on big flips, right? So Waffles on Nyx Bloom Ancient, Consecrated Sphinx, Seaborn Muse, right? Obviously, he was not on Wanchitong for the course of the tournament, and Cabbage Man, because those were not currently legal, but I'm comparing to his updated Moxfield list, which I believe you can see the recent changes on. That'll show you what was different for the tournament. Let's actually take a look at that really quick. He basically went on those 2 cards and was on the rest of these for the course of the tournament, right? So, and then as you can see, definitely more creature-based strategies for this version of the list on Nyx Bloom, Consecrated Sphinx, Cabbage Merchant, all that kind of stuff. Like, it's not Cabbage Merchant for the course of the tournament. Also on a few more of the copy effects, right? On Copy Enchantment, while I'm just on Mirror Maid for that type of effect. On Amphibian Downpour, which I think he's been on for quite some time, Copy Artifact as well, and a few more creature tutors, things like that. I think it reshapes one of the newer additions to his version of the deck list too. Hidden Strings, I've been told by a couple Kinnan pilots, has actually been performing pretty well for the deck so far. And on Born Upon a Wind, instead of it seems like instead of like a high fae thing, going for that version. Born Upon a Wind I've not been super impressed with in the deck. I definitely probably would play high fae first, even though high fae has been something, as I mentioned, I'm not historically super high on. And then we look at my list, which in comparison, he's not on Wonder or Kick, he's not on Sky Turtle for the recursion, not on Sylvan Library, Crop Rotation, Treasure Vault, that whole package, or Crop Rotation E-Zone is gone. So essentially in the Born spot, we have there Scour for Scrap as our instant speed tutor, Gilded Drake to deal with some of those creature matchups. And as you can see, definitely like my version is a little bit more focused on like getting those more consistency with the winning part of the game for some of those faster matchups, all that kind of stuff, and more card revenge engines, and less reliance on the flip plan a little bit. Yeah, and no Cradle and stuff like that. So yep, that's the major differences between these 2 lists. As I said, they're definitely functionally a little bit different. This version is definitely a little bit more into the Rhystic Mystic game, whereas as I said, try to diversify that a little bit more in this variation. But congrats to Freedom on his top 4. We have Thrashing Death, our player who was able to take us down after the 3-hour game here with Please Don't Tell Ikra. Thrashing Death is actually someone I've played multiple times in the Texas tournaments, and so it's someone I know pretty well, and it's really cool to see him top 4 the largest West Coast tournament of all time. So he's been known for being a Dargo Timna pilot, but plays this deck kind of always. As you may know, there are multiple Dargo Timnas in this top 4, so I'm super excited to talk about them. But for those who aren't exposed to Dargo Timna, essentially you are using the Mardu card advantage from Timna plus Dargo's insane ability to combo to sort of compensate for the fact that Mardu tends to struggle to actually win the game. Very good at going fast and having silences for winning the game, but not super great at actually closing the window. But that's where Dargo comes in. Dargo actually provides a lot of healthy combos for that space and is just a solid commander for Mardu in general. So really cool to see Dargo. Timna, specifically, this combination kind of killing it in the current metagame. For those who haven't seen this deck, it is a lot of the speed plan of Mardu, right? A lot of low to the ground creatures, a lot of sack fodder for Dargo for sure. You got all your silence effects. You have things like Delny to double the Timna value, double some of the other stuff. You have your dual caster mage, twin flame combos for infinite combats. The Mayhem Devil that I mentioned blew me out during the semifinals multiple times. You have your Ruthless Technomancer combos. For those who aren't familiar with Ruthless Technomancer combos, they get a little bit in the weeds with Dargo, but essentially if you have Ruthless Technomancer and a way to make a copy of Ruthless Technomancer, which in this version of the deck there's Jolly Balloon Man and I believe also Cursed Mirror in the artifact slot as well. Yeah, so if you have a second way to make Technomancer, you essentially sacrifice your real Technomancer, you get Dargo to the battlefield, having cracked a bunch of treasures to cast it. You're then able to use the mana from those treasures to reanimate the real Technomancer, sacrifice your Dargo, and then start repeating that loop over and over again, using your Dargo to sacrifice the real Technomancer, etc., etc. And what essentially happens is that you're able to have infinite death triggers, infinite treasures, and infinite enter the battlefield abilities for that turn, and then, you know, obviously being able to win with Mayhem Devil, or infinite recursions of Bowmasters, or Magda tutoring every artifact out of your library, or etc., etc., right? Like, there's a lot of ways that that starting process converts to an actual factual real win. Notably, a lot of these Dargo decks now are, yeah, I guess also I should mention, they're doing Pyranid Abyss, and they're doing Adnaz, and they're doing Bolas Citadel, right? Like, these versions slam win cons like it's nobody's business. They're on Breach. The notable Dargo combos that I've mentioned are specifically, you need one thing that will make red mana, whether that's Relic of Legends, being able to tap Dargo with haste to float a red mana, or Burgi, which as you cast your Dargo from the command zone over and over again, it will be netting you that red mana. And then you need a sack outlet that actually kills your opponents, right? So either using Altar of Dementia to be able to mill your opponent's entire libraries out, or using Goblin Bombardment to ping your opponents down to death. That's the main Dargo combos, plus you can breach into a number of those wins. Some lists are playing Praetor's Grasp, although I believe our winning deck list was not playing Praetor's Grasp as that backup win condition. But at the end of the day, the idea is you are basically using a super heavy amount of explosivity to push wins pretty fast with this deck list. So congrats to Thrashing on top cutting this tournament. I obviously mentioned that the semifinals loss was super disappointing, but Thrashing is a really cool player, and I was very happy to at least lose to somebody who I consider a friend. So sweet stuff there. And obviously they played great during Swiss to enter the semis with a fantastic record as well, right? So absolutely killed it for the course of this tournament, and definitely should be super proud of how much he did great. We have W. Cole here with ABCEDH Mr. Chunk. This is Atali. We had an Atali up in Top Cut, and funny enough, I didn't even hear much about this Atali deep run throughout the course of this tournament, but Atali out here killing it. There was I believe one other Atali player that was a win short of getting there as well. So some Atali pilots doing really well. Notably, I was talking about something, this was somebody recently, and they wanted me to shout out the fact that Atali's super volatile right now, right? Some players with Atali are doing really, really well, and some players with Atali are absolutely crashing and burning with the deck, right? So Atali is an amazing deck. You can definitely high roll with it, but folks, it is worth noting, and responsible to do so, that it is one of the most volatile decks in the format, right? It's one of those decks that you should expect to either 5-0 or 0-5 with it, and expect that week to week it's going to be very different. But yeah, Atali's out here killing it. Your objective is to put an Atali on the stack, and then put another Atali on the stack, and then hope that you can keep doing that until your opponents fall over dead. You're taking their win cons, you're doing the thing, you're jamming Atalis. And definitely somewhat interactive for an Atali deck. We'd love to see Atali decks trying to play a little bit of responsible gaming. We like that, and definitely a few less major wacky over the top finishers than I'm kind of used to with Atali nowadays. Seems like Avendo Brush Razor is also sticking in the deck, which is kind of cool to see that card not just being a sort of one-hit wonder in the deck list, but actually kicking around. I will say, ever since this has been added to the deck list, every time I see it in a mulligan, I'm like, oh yeah, this card kind of slaps. So I'm definitely pro Brush Razor myself. But yeah, congrats to our pilot for second place of the largest cEDH tournament on the West Coast with Atali. We love a good chunky time. Also, major shout out to the fact that they're playing Ruby Medallion, which I think was one that I was a really I always have been a huge fan of in Atali, and I felt like for a while there, many people in the Discord were like, "There's no reason to play this card," and I was like, "I don't know, I really like it." So I'd definitely be curious to hear if our pilot still feels like it was worth the slot at the end of the tournament, because it's been some, as I said, it's been a card that very specifically in Atali I've been trying to push for quite some time, because it to me, it felt like it did a lot of work. So we have our champion here, Ribbiter, here with House on Fire, which is so cool. Another Timna Dargo pilot. The Timna Dargo deck's showing up and putting in some hefty work here. So hell yeah, I believe the finals match ended on turn 2 with a turn 2 Peer into the Abyss, which is so sick. Congrats to Sylvie on absolutely crushing at this tournament and taking down the largest West Coast tournament ever on this super sweet. Let's do a little comparison. So the differences between the lists is actually 16, which is, I think, a pretty sizable amount of differences. Sylvie's list here on Stitcher Supplier, which is interesting because it's another backup. Breach win condition, right? You're able to Culling the Weak, Stitcher Supplier, and Underworld Breach, and actually net 2 black mana as you're going through. You're sculpting the same amount of cards. You're not increasing the size of your graveyard, but you're able to still push a little bit deeper. Necro in this version of the deck list because you're on Academy Rector. So I really like the Academy Rector tech. It's been something I've been really high on in Dargo for quite some time. And so I love this idea that you can just either A, have an uncounterable Necropotence or an uncounterable Underworld Breach hit the battlefield as long as you sacrifice your Rector, which you have a sacrifice outlet in the command zone. It's what Dargo does, right? So even in goldfishing this deck a little bit, I've noticed that the Rector has come in at least 4 or 5 times when I've been messing around with the deck. So definitely very pro Academy Rector. I'm also so happy to see Sylvie on Shambling Ghast, Impulsive Pilferer, and Stitchers. That's like a core selection of cards in any Dargo deck that's more proactively inclined that I've been singing the praises of for such a long time. So it's really cool to see those cards included in here. The Emergent Zone Spice, you gotta love it, and then a few extra silence effects here and there. Sticky Fingers, definitely one of the ones I was a little bit, had to read it twice to make sure I remembered what this card did even. Yawgmoth does some really interesting stuff in decks like this too. I feel like this is a card that like I don't hear about a lot, but every time someone mentions that they played Yawgmoth, they're always really hype on it. So I'm interested to hear what Sylvie's impression of this card was. Also, Vexing Bauble in the deck to do some, obviously protecting of your wins. Mardu Devotee, I'm assuming, is really just another cheap body in the deck that also gives some marginal value from here and there. It's not one that I'm super in love with in the deck list, but it seems fine enough. And then compare that to our Don't Tell Egret list, notably Sylvie's list not on Dual Caster Twin Flame or Molten Duplication effects, right? So definitely a bit of an interesting difference there, and also not on the backup Praetor's Grasp combo, which means I'm pretty sure that Sylvie's list actually has no way to win if... for example, some classic counter Dargo tech that can happen sometimes is someone will let you go through a couple iterations of the Dargo loop and then like hit you with a silence, for example, and then your Dargo costs like 18 to 20 mana from that point on. So I don't necessarily know that there's exactly an out for that exact situation in Sylvie's list, which obviously would be like a little bit concerning if that did come up. But apart from that, yeah, that's the major differences there. A couple land differences here and there. The Wheel of Fortune not in the deck, which I think is kind of like a notable exclusion for sure. And then, different choices of silences is really the other thing we're seeing here. But yeah, I mean, congrats to Sylvie on winning this huge tournament, and congrats to all of our players in the top cut. It's not easy to make top cut of a 295 person tournament, but many folks out here showing us how it's done. So congrats to everyone. This was a super sweet tournament. Thank you to the specifically Alex Hire of Playing with Power and the folks over at TC's Rockets and everyone on the judge staff and all of that. It was honestly a super cleanly run event. There was not any real drama with the judging. There was not any real drama with the tournament organization. It went really well. Well-run tournament. Like, yeah, if anything, like the prizing was a bit aggressively top heavy was something I noted for the course of the tournament, where like there was a very big discrepancy between first place to second through fourth to top 16, which I'd mentioned to some other players once again before I had even made top cut, right? But that's literally maybe my only nitpicky note for the entire event, but it was genuinely a blast. I had a ton of fun doing it. Like any time I have the opportunity to get out and see all the players on the West Coast who I don't get to interact with as much on a daily basis, it's always a really good time. So Thank you to all the folks I hung out with out there, the folks who I went to dinner with. Like, it was genuinely such an amazing time getting out there, and also finally being like over the sick slump. It was able to like actually go out and enjoy an awesome tournament. Much love to everyone. It was super great to get out to Fishbowl, and thank you all so much for watching this video. I genuinely appreciate everyone who is out there making this happen. As I mentioned, if you're interested in coaching stuff, hit me up at comedianmtg@gmail.com, because that sale is going on right now for the month of November. And yeah, let me know what's up for that, and I'll usually do something around the holidays as well if you gift sessions for folks. So thank you all for watching so very much, and I'll excitedly see you on the next one. Peace.